The morning fog hung heavy over the grounds of Gatcombe Park as Princess and stood at her kitchen window, cradling a steaming cup of tea in her weathered hands. The silence of dawn was broken only by the distant sound of horses moving in their stables, a sound that had comforted her for decades. But today, even her beloved animals couldn't ease the weight pressing down on her chest. Her phone had been buzzing relentlessly since 5 in the morning. Reporters, royal correspondents, and palace officials all wanting the same thing: a statement, a comment, anything from the Princess Royal about the ongoing crisis that had gripped the royal family. Her father's health had taken another concerning turn, and the whispers in the corridors of Buckingham Palace were growing louder by the day, and had always been the family's anchor, the one who stayed silent when storms raged around them. While her brothers and their personal lives dominated headlines, she had quietly carried out her duties, visited her charities, and supported her causes without fanfare or drama. The media had long since learned that Princess and didn't give interviews about family matters. She was a vault of royal secrets, a fortress of discretion. But as she watched the sun struggle to break through the morning mist and knew that today would be different, the weight of unspoken truths had become too heavy to bear alone. Her nephew William was struggling under the immense pressure of his future role, while simultaneously supporting his wife, Catherine, through her own health battles. The young couple, once so full of hope and energy, now carried shadows under their eyes that spoke of sleepless nights and constant worry. The previous evening, William had called her. His voice, usually so steady and composed, had cracked with emotion as he described the impossible position he found himself in. Between his father's declining health, his wife's ongoing recovery, and the relentless scrutiny of the press, he felt like he was drowning, and had listened in silence, her heart breaking for the young man who had already endured so much loss in his life. "Aunt," and he had whispered into the phone, "I don't know how much more we can take. Catherine tries to be strong, but I can see how much she's struggling. And Father, every time I see him, he looks smaller, more fragile. The doctors say he's fighting, but I can see it in his eyes. He's tired, so very tired," and had wanted to reach through the phone and embrace her nephew, to tell him that everything would be all right, but she knew that empty platitudes wouldn't help. Instead, she had done what she always did. She had listened, really listened, and then she had made a decision that would change everything. As the morning progressed, and found herself walking through the familiar paths of her estate, her mind churning with memories and responsibilities. She thought about her father, King Charles, and how he had carried the weight of duty for so long, first as Prince of Wales and now as monarch. She remembered the young man he had once been, idealistic and passionate about his causes, and how the years had shaped him into the thoughtful, dedicated king he had become. The thought of him fighting this battle, largely alone and in private, filled her with a fierce protective instinct she hadn't felt since she was a child defending her younger brothers in the palace nursery. Her thoughts turned to Catherine, the woman who had brought such joy to their family, and had watched from afar as Catherine had seamlessly integrated into their complicated world, bringing warmth and normalcy to William's life. She had seen how Catherine had faced every challenge with grace and dignity, from the intense media attention of their courtship to the demands of royal motherhood. But this current trial was testing her in ways that no amount of royal training could have prepared her for. The health scare that had dominated recent months had taken its toll on Catherine in ways that only those closest to her could truly understand, and had witnessed the fear in William's eyes when he spoke about his wife, the way his voice caught when he mentioned her name. She had seen how Catherine had tried to maintain her public composure while privately battling not just her physical health, but the emotional toll of watching her husband carry such enormous burdens. And paused by the old oak tree at the edge of her property, the same tree where she had climbed as a child to escape the pressures of royal life. Even then, she had been different from her brothers, more direct, less willing to play the games that royal life often demanded. She had always spoken her mind, sometimes to the consternation of palace officials, but always with the family's best interests at heart. The decision crystallized in that moment, standing under the ancient branches that had sheltered her for so many years. She would break her decades-long silence, not for the press or the public, but for William and Catherine. She would use her voice, respected and trusted after years of faithful service, to shield them from some of the pressure that threatened to overwhelm them. She would speak not as the Princess Royal, bound by protocol and tradition, but as an aunt who loved her nephew and his wife, and as a daughter who wanted to protect her father's dignity during his most vulnerable time. The walk back to the house felt different, purposeful, and had spent her entire adult life supporting the institution of the monarchy through her actions rather than her words. She had attended thousands of engagements, supported hundreds of charities, and carried out her duties with a quiet efficiency that had earned her respect both within the family and from the public. But now, she realized silence wasn't enough. Inside her study, surrounded by photographs of family moments and royal occasions, and sat down at her desk and reached for her phone. The first call would be to her private secretary, the second to William, and the third to the palace press office. She would need to choose her words carefully, craft a statement that would provide support without revealing too much, strength without appearing to criticize the handling of recent events. As she began to dial, and thought about her mother, Queen Elizabeth II, and what she would have done in this situation. The late queen had mastered the art of saying much while revealing little, of providing comfort through her presence rather than her words. But these were different times with different challenges, and knew that what worked for one generation might not work for another. The afternoon sun was beginning to slant through the windows when it finally reached William. His relief at hearing from her was palpable, even through the phone connection. They spoke for nearly an hour, William sharing details about Catherine's progress and his father's condition that had never made it into any official updates, and listened, offered advice when asked, and gradually revealed her intention to make a public statement. "Are you sure, Aunt?" "Anne?" William asked, his voice filled with both hope and concern. "I know how much you value your privacy, how important it's been to you to stay out of the public eye on family matters." Anne's response was firm, but gentle. "Sometimes, William, protecting the family means stepping into the light rather than staying in the shadows. You and Catherine have carried this burden alone for too long. It's time for the rest of us to stand with you publicly, not just privately." The conversation ended with William expressing gratitude that brought tears to Anne's eyes. She had made the right decision. She was certain of that now. Whatever came next, whatever scrutiny or attention her words might bring, it would be worth it if it provided even a small measure of relief to the young couple who meant so much to her. As evening approached, and found herself back in her kitchen, preparing a simple dinner and thinking about the statement she would craft later that night. The words would need to be perfect, strong enough to provide real support, honest enough to be believable, and careful enough to respect the family's privacy while still acknowledging their struggles. The horses had settled in their stables, the house was quiet, and Princess Anne was finally ready to break her silence. Tomorrow, the world would hear from her in a way they never had before, and William and Catherine would know that they were not facing their challenges alone. The Princess Royal, the woman who had spent decades proving her worth through actions rather than words, was finally ready to use her voice in service of the people she loved most. The grandfather clock in the hallway chimed midnight as Princess Anne sat in her study, surrounded by crumpled papers and empty teacups. The statement that would change everything lay before her, revised and rewritten countless times. Each word had been carefully chosen, each sentence crafted to provide maximum support while maintaining the dignity that the royal family required during such difficult times. Her fingers drummed against the mahogany desk as she read through the draft once more. The silence of Gatcombe Park at night was profound, broken only by the occasional sound of an owl in the ancient trees that bordered her property. This was the time when she did her best thinking, when the demands of royal duties fell away, and she could simply be and a daughter worried about her father, an aunt concerned for her nephew's family, and a woman who had witnessed decades of royal history unfold. The memories came flooding back as she worked. She remembered Catherine's first Christmas at Sandringham, how nervous the young woman had been, trying so hard to fit into traditions that stretched back centuries, and had watched from across the drawing room as Catherine sat quietly, observing everything, learning the unspoken rules that governed royal gatherings. There had been something special about her even then, a groundedness, a genuine warmth that couldn't be taught or manufactured. Over the years, and had grown to respect Catherine enormously. She had watched her handle the pressure of royal life with remarkable grace, always putting duty first even when it cost her personally. When Catherine had struggled with severe morning sickness during her pregnancies, she had still managed to fulfill her engagements whenever possible. When criticism came, she had absorbed it quietly and continued working, and recognized in Catherine the same stoic determination that had carried the royal women through decades of public scrutiny. But this latest challenge was different. The health scare that had dominated recent months wasn't something that could be handled with grace and duty alone, and had seen the fear in Catherine's eyes during family gatherings, the way she would unconsciously reach for William's hand, seeking comfort and reassurance. She had witnessed the strain it placed on their marriage, how they struggled to maintain their public composure while privately dealing with uncertainty and fear. William had borne the brunt of it all. As the heir to the throne, he was expected to be a source of stability and strength, and could see how the weight was crushing him. During their phone conversations, she heard the exhaustion in his voice, the way he tried to sound optimistic while his words betrayed his deep worry. He was caught between his duty to support his father during the king's health struggles and his need to be present for his wife and children during their most vulnerable time. The king's condition had been a closely guarded secret, known only to the immediate family and a small circle of trusted advisors, and had been shocked by his appearance during their last private meeting. Charles, always so particular about his appearance and demeanor, had seemed diminished somehow. His clothes hung loose on his frame, and there was a fragility to his movements that spoke of a man fighting a battle he couldn't win through willpower alone. But what had struck him most was not her father's physical decline, but his emotional state. Charles had spoken with her about his fears, not for himself, but for the family he would leave behind. He worried about William's readiness to take on the full weight of the crown, about Catherine's health, about the young grandchildren who were just beginning to understand their place in the world. I had hoped for more time, he had confided to, and during one of their walks through the gardens at Clarence House. More time to prepare William, more time to see the children grow up, more time to complete the work I started. His voice had broken slightly as he continued. I worry that I'm failing them, and that I'm leaving them with burdens they're not ready to carry, and had wanted to contradict him, to tell him he was being too hard on himself, but she understood his concerns. The monarchy was more than just an institution. It was a living, breathing entity that required constant care and attention. The transition from one reign to the next was always fraught with challenges, but the current circumstances made it particularly complex. The public attention surrounding Catherine's health had been relentless. Every appearance was analyzed, every canceled engagement noted and discussed. The speculation had grown more intense as weeks passed without detailed updates, and knew that the pressure was taking its toll on the entire family. William was trying to protect his wife's privacy while fulfilling his own royal duties, and the strain was becoming increasingly visible. Anne's decision to speak publicly had not come lightly. She had built her reputation on discretion and dedication, on letting her work speak for itself rather than seeking attention through statements or interviews. The press had long since learned that Princess Anne didn't provide commentary on family matters, and she had cultivated an image of being above the fray of royal drama. But watching William and Catherine's struggle and relative silence had finally pushed her to act. She remembered her mother's advice about duty, that sometimes it required sacrifice, and sometimes it required courage. Speaking out would be both for Anne. She would be sacrificing her privacy and opening herself to scrutiny she had always avoided. But it would also be an act of courage, standing up for family members who couldn't defend themselves without appearing self-serving. The statement she had crafted was carefully balanced. It acknowledged the challenges the family was facing without providing specific details that would compromise anyone's privacy. It offered strong support for William and Catherine while respecting the king's dignity. Most importantly, it sought to shift some of the attention away from the younger couple and onto her, someone who was better equipped to handle intense media scrutiny, and had learned from years of public service that words, once spoken publicly, took on a life of their own. She knew that whatever she said would be analyzed, interpreted, and potentially misunderstood. But she also knew that silence, in this case, was becoming more damaging than speech. The speculation and rumors swirling around the family were creating their own narrative, one that might be more harmful than the truth. As she finalized the statement and thought about the conversation she would need to have before it was released, William had given his blessing, even expressed gratitude for her willingness to speak out. But she would need to inform other family members, particularly her brothers Andrew and Edward, who might be caught off guard by her departure from her usual silence. The palace machinery would also need to be prepared. Her private secretary had already begun coordinating with the palace press office, ensuring that the statement would be released at the optimal time and through the proper channels. There would be follow-up interviews requested, additional statements demanded, but Anne was determined to keep her intervention focused and limited. She rose from her desk and walked to the window overlooking the gardens. The moon was bright enough to illuminate the landscape she knew so well, the hills and valleys that had been her sanctuary for decades. Tomorrow would bring chaos, attention, and scrutiny, but tonight she could still enjoy the peace of knowing she was doing the right thing. The phone call to William earlier that evening had been emotional. His voice had cracked with relief when she told him about her decision. And for a moment he had sounded like the young boy she remembered rather than the future king he had become. Catherine had gotten on the phone as well, her own voice thick with emotion as she thanked and for being willing to step forward. "You don't know what this means to us," Catherine had said quietly. "I felt so isolated, so worried about saying the wrong thing or appearing weak. Knowing that you're standing with us, it changes everything," and had assured her that she wasn't alone, that the family would rally around them during this difficult time. But she also knew that words, even supportive ones, could only do so much. The real work would come in the days and weeks ahead as they all learned to navigate these new challenges together. The clock struck 1 in the morning as Anne finally turned off the lights in her study. The statement was complete, the phone calls had been made, and the wheels were in motion for what happened next. As she climbed the stairs to her bedroom, she felt a mixture of apprehension and relief. She had spent her entire adult life avoiding this kind of public attention, but now that the decision was made, she felt oddly at peace with it. Sleep came easier than she had expected. For the first time in months, and fell asleep not with worry about her family, but with the satisfaction of knowing that she had finally found a way to help them. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, but tonight she could rest knowing that William and Catherine would not face those challenges alone. The morning light filtering through the curtains of Gatcombe Park seemed different somehow, charged with the anticipation of what was to come. Princess Anne had awakened before dawn, as was her habit, but today the familiar routine of checking on her horses and reviewing her schedule felt weighted with significance. In just a few hours, her carefully crafted statement would be released to the world, and everything would change. She stood in her kitchen, mechanically preparing her morning tea while her mind raced through the potential consequences of her decision. The statement sat on the kitchen table, printed on official letterhead, each word representing hours of careful consideration. It was concise but powerful, supportive, but respectful, and she hoped it would achieve what she intended, to provide a shield for William and Catherine during their most vulnerable time. The first call came at 7:30 sharp. Her private secretary, Margaret, had been coordinating with the palace press office throughout the night, and now the final preparations were underway. The statement would be released at 10 o'clock, time to capture the morning news cycle while giving the family time to prepare for the inevitable media storm that would follow. Your Royal Highness. Margaret's voice was crisp and professional despite the early hour. The palace has confirmed that they're ready to proceed. The king has been informed and has given his approval. Prince William has also been notified that we're moving forward as planned, and felt a flutter of nervousness in her stomach, but her voice remained steady as she replied, "Very good, Margaret. Please ensure that all family members are informed before the public release. I don't want anyone to be caught off guard by this." As she hung up the phone and reflected on the conversations she had already had with her siblings, Edward had been supportive but concerned, worried about the attention this might bring to the family during an already difficult time. Andrew had been more skeptical, questioning whether speaking out publicly was the right approach. But in the end, both had acknowledged that something needed to be done to support William and Catherine. The most important conversation had been with her father. King Charles had listened quietly and explained her intentions, his weathered hands folded in his lap as he considered her words. When she finished, he had been silent for several long minutes before speaking. And he had said finally, his voice hoarse with emotion, "I have always been proud of your dedication to duty, but I have never been more grateful for your judgment than I am right now. William and Catherine need this support, and you are the right person to provide it." The memory of that conversation strengthened Anne's resolve as she prepared for the day ahead. She had scheduled a series of engagements that would keep her busy after the statement was released, partly to maintain some sense of normalcy and partly to demonstrate that this wasn't about seeking attention or changing her role within the family. She was still the hardworking Princess Royal, but she was also an aunt and daughter who would no longer stand by silently while her family suffered. At 9:30, and found herself in her study, watching the clock and thinking about William and Catherine. They would be preparing for their own day of engagements, putting on brave faces and carrying out their duties despite the personal turmoil they were experiencing. Soon, they would know that they weren't facing the scrutiny alone, that someone was willing to step into the spotlight to advocate for them. The statement itself was deceptively simple, and had chosen her words carefully, drawing on decades of experience in public speaking to craft something that would resonate without revealing too much. She spoke of her admiration for William's dedication to his role and his family, of her respect for Catherine's strength and grace under pressure, and of her pride in watching them both navigate impossible circumstances with dignity. But the real power of the statement lay not in what it said, but in what it represented. Princess, and known for her reticence and discretion, was breaking decades of silence to defend her family. The weight of that departure from her established pattern would speak louder than any specific word she might use. As 10 o'clock approached, Anne's phone began ringing with increasing frequency. Royal correspondents who had been alerted to the impending statement, palace officials coordinating the release, and family members wanting to express their support. She answered what calls she could while keeping one eye on the clock, knowing that in just minutes, her private decision would become public knowledge. The moment the statement was released, Anne felt a strange sense of relief wash over her. The decision that had weighed so heavily on her mind for weeks was now out of her hands, committed to the public record, and beyond her ability to change. Whatever happened next, she had done what she believed was right for her family. The reaction was immediate and overwhelming. Her phone began ringing constantly with requests for interviews, follow-up statements, and additional commentary. And had expected this, but the sheer volume of interest surprised even her. She had underestimated how hungry the media was for any official comment on the family situation, and how much weight her words would carry given her reputation for staying silent on family matters. Margaret fielded most of the calls, politely declining interview requests while acknowledging the interest in the princess's statement, and had been clear that she didn't want this to become an ongoing media campaign. She had said what needed to be said, and now she wanted to return to her regular duties while allowing the statement to do its work. But the impact was already becoming clear. Social media was buzzing with discussion about Anne's unprecedented intervention, with many praising her for standing up for William and Catherine. Royal commentators were analyzing every word, discussing what this might mean for the family's approach to public communication. Most importantly, the narrative surrounding William and Catherine began to shift from speculation about their struggles to admiration for their resilience in the face of challenge. The first feedback from William came around noon, in the form of a brief text message that simply said, "Thank you. Already feeling the difference." Vu, and smiled as she read it, imagining the relief he must be feeling to know that someone else was helping to shoulder the burden of public attention. Catherine's response came later in the day, during a brief phone call between her engagements. Her voice was stronger than and had heard it in weeks, with a note of hope that had been missing for some time. And Catherine said, her words coming quickly as if she had been waiting all day to express her gratitude, "I can't tell you what this means to me. For months I felt like we were drowning, like every day brought new speculation and judgment. Knowing that you're standing with us, it's given me strength I didn't know I still had." And was deeply moved by Catherine's words, but she also heard something else in her voice, a determination that suggested the statement had achieved more than just providing temporary relief. It seemed to have reminded Catherine of her own strength, of the family support that surrounded her even when she couldn't see it clearly. The afternoon brought unexpected developments. Other members of the royal family, inspired by Anne's example, began reaching out privately to express their own support for William and Catherine. Cousins who had maintained diplomatic distance during the health crisis suddenly found ways to show solidarity. The statement had created a ripple effect, encouraging others to step forward in their own ways. But perhaps the most meaningful response came from an unexpected source. Late in the evening, as Anne was reviewing the day's events and preparing for bed, she received a call from a palace aide with news that brought tears to her eyes. King Charles, despite his own health challenges, had decided to make a brief public appearance the following day to demonstrate his continued engagement with his royal duties. It was a subtle but powerful message that the monarchy remained strong even during difficult times. As Anne reflected on the day's events, she realized that her decision to speak out had accomplished more than she had dared hope. She had not only provided support for William and Catherine, but had also created an opportunity for the entire family to demonstrate their unity and resilience. The statement had been a catalyst, transforming private support into public solidarity. The irony wasn't lost on her that by speaking out, she had actually strengthened the family's position. For years, their silence in the face of speculation had been interpreted as weakness or inability to respond. But Anne's carefully chosen words had shown that their previous silence had been a choice, not an inability to communicate. When they chose to speak, they did so with power and authority. As she prepared for bed, and felt a deep sense of satisfaction about the day's events. The decision that had seemed so risky that morning now felt inevitable and right. She had used her voice not for personal gain or attention, but in service of family members who needed her support. In doing so, she had honored the values that had guided her throughout her royal career while adapting to the needs of a new generation. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and continued scrutiny, but tonight Anne could rest knowing that William and Catherine would face those challenges with the knowledge that their family stood firmly behind them. The Princess Royal had spoken, and the royal family was stronger for it. 3 weeks had passed since Princess Anne's statement had transformed the landscape around the royal family's private struggles, and the changes were remarkable. What had begun as a desperate attempt to provide support for William and Catherine had evolved into something far more significant, a new chapter in how the royal family engaged with both crisis and opportunity. The morning sun streamed through the windows of Clarence's house, as Anne sat across from her father, King Charles, sharing what had become their weekly private breakfast. The transformation in him over the past 3 weeks had been extraordinary. The fragility that had so worried her seemed to have been replaced by a renewed sense of purpose and energy. His doctors were cautiously optimistic, speaking of remarkable progress that seemed to coincide directly with the family's new unity and the reduced pressure on William and Catherine. And Charles said, setting down his teacup with hands that seemed steadier than they had in months. I think your decision to speak out may have saved more than just William and Catherine's well-being. I believe it may have saved the monarchy itself during one of its most vulnerable moments. And studied her father's face, seeing color in his cheeks that had been absent for too long. The worry lines that had deepened during his health crisis seemed less pronounced, and there was a spark in his eyes that spoke of a man who had found his footing again. The public support that had emerged following her statement hadn't just helped William and Catherine. It had reminded Charles of the strength and resilience of the institution he led. The ripple effects of that day, 3 weeks ago, continued to amaze her. What had started as a simple statement of support had catalyzed a transformation in how the royal family approached communication and crisis management. Instead of maintaining their traditional silence in the face of speculation, they had learned to use carefully chosen words to guide public understanding while maintaining their dignity and privacy. William had perhaps changed the most dramatically. The young man who called her that night weeks ago, his voice breaking with exhaustion and worry, had found his footing as both a future king and a devoted husband, and had watched him at recent family gatherings, noting how his shoulders no longer carried the weight of bearing everything alone. He moved with confidence again, spoke with authority, and, most importantly, seemed to have rediscovered joy in both his royal duties and his family life. Catherine's transformation had been equally remarkable, but more subtle. The fear that had shadowed her eyes for months had been replaced by a quiet strength that spoke of someone who had faced her deepest challenges and emerged victorious. Her health had improved steadily, but more importantly, her spirit had been restored. She engaged with her royal duties with renewed enthusiasm and spoke about future projects with an optimism that had been missing during the darkest days. The children, too, had benefited from the changed atmosphere. Prince George, Princess Charlotte, and Prince Louis had their parents back in ways they hadn't realized they'd lost them. William and Catherine were more present, more relaxed, and more able to provide the stability and security that children needed during uncertain times. Family gatherings had become celebrations again rather than careful exercises in maintaining appearances. Anne's own life had changed in unexpected ways as well. The statement that she had expected to be a one-time intervention had opened doors to new forms of engagement with the public and the press. She found herself being consulted more frequently on family matters, her voice carrying weight that it hadn't possessed before. But rather than feeling burdened by this new responsibility, she embraced it as an evolution of her service to both family and country. The public reaction had exceeded everyone's expectations. Letters of support had poured in from around the world, not just for William and Catherine, but for the entire royal family. People had responded to the authenticity and courage represented by Anne's decision to speak out, and that response had translated into increased support for the monarchy as an institution. Approval ratings had climbed steadily, and public engagement with royal events had reached levels not seen in years. But perhaps the most significant change had been in the family's relationship with the media. Anne's statement had demonstrated that they could engage on their own terms, providing information and context when it served the public interest while maintaining boundaries around their private lives. The press had responded with what seemed to be greater respect for those boundaries, perhaps recognizing that transparency offered willingly was more valuable than secrets pursued relentlessly. During a recent conversation with Catherine, and had been struck by how articulate and confident the younger woman had become when discussing her experience. I realized, Catherine had said, that I had been so focused on trying to be perfect, on never showing weakness, that I forgot that authenticity is actually a strength. When you spoke out for us, it reminded me that being real, being human, is what people actually want from us. This newfound authenticity had transformed Catherine's public engagements. Instead of the careful, controlled appearances that had characterized her earlier royal career, she now brought genuine emotion and connection to her work. People responded to this change immediately, and her popularity had soared to new heights. More importantly, she seemed to be enjoying her role in ways she hadn't before, finding fulfillment in the connections she made rather than simply enduring the obligations. William had embraced a similar evolution in his approach. He spoke more openly about the challenges of balancing royal duty with family life, about the pressures of his future role, and about his hopes for the monarchy's future. This openness had made him more relatable to the public without diminishing his authority or dignity. If anything, his willingness to acknowledge struggle had made him seem more capable of leadership, not less. The king's health had continued to improve beyond what anyone had dared hope. His medical team spoke of the positive effects of reduced stress and increased family support, and knew there were deeper factors at play. Charles had found renewed purpose in preparing William for his future role, in supporting Catherine's continued recovery, and in leading a family that had learned to support each other publicly as well as privately. Recent family gatherings had taken on an almost festive quality. The children laughed more freely. The adults relaxed into genuine conversation instead of careful small talk, and there was a sense of shared strength that hadn't existed before. And watched these interactions with deep satisfaction, knowing that her decision to break her silence had helped create this new dynamic. The professional recognition had been unexpected but deeply meaningful, and had received acknowledgement from constitutional scholars, royal biographers, and even international observers for what they termed a masterstroke of family leadership and crisis management. But more important to her were the private thanks from family members who had found their own voices as a result of her example, looking toward the future and saw opportunities that hadn't existed before. The family's new approach to communication had opened possibilities for deeper engagement with their charitable causes, more meaningful connections with the public, and more effective advocacy for the issues they cared about. They had learned that strategic transparency could be more powerful than reflexive secrecy. As she prepared to leave Clarence House that morning and reflected on the conversation she had planned for later that day with William and Catherine, they had requested a private meeting to discuss their plans for the coming year, and she knew they wanted her advice on how to continue building on the momentum created by recent events. The thought of being consulted as a senior advisor rather than simply a supportive family member represented a new chapter in her own royal career. The car ride back to Gatcombe Park gave her time to process the magnitude of what had changed. 3 weeks ago, she had been a silent supporter watching her family struggle under impossible pressure. Today, she was a key figure in their recovery and renewal, someone whose voice carried weight and whose judgment was trusted. The transformation had been remarkable not just for the family, but for her personally. As Gatcombe Park came into view, and felt a deep sense of peace about the path she had chosen. The decision to speak out had required courage and had involved risk, but it had ultimately strengthened everyone it was meant to protect. William and Catherine were thriving. King Charles was recovering, the children were secure, and the monarchy itself was more stable than it had been in months. That evening, Asin stood once again at her kitchen window with a cup of tea. Watching the sun set over the familiar landscape, she allowed herself a moment of quiet pride. She had spent decades proving that action spoke louder than words, but when words were needed, she had found the right ones. The silence that had defined her approach to royal life had been broken not for personal gain, but in service of the people she loved most. The future stretched ahead with new possibilities and continued challenges, and knew that whatever came next, the royal family would face it together, with voices unified and strength shared. Princess and had spoken, and in doing so, had reminded everyone that sometimes the most powerful thing a person can do is to simply refuse to let the people they love face their battles alone.